worked out well.
We want to go ahead and call the work session of July the 12th, 2011 to order. The second item on the agenda is citizen comments. This is for comment on items that are not on the agenda during this section, and if there anyone who wants to speak, I'm going to limit them to 2 minutes tonight. Yes, sir. Come up and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Doc Bennett. I live over on Royal Oaks Boulevard. I'm a local music producer and promoter, and I'd like to speak just real quickly about the sound ordinance. We have a resource available to us here. His name is Stephen Durr. Stephen Durr is considered world-renowned in his expertise in sound transmission, mitigating problems like we're experiencing right here. Unfortunately, he's unavailable tonight. He's unavailable on the 26th, but I would like to suggest or request that you all check out his bio and see if it would be okay with y'all to bring him in August. He currently is in Austin, Texas, working on the very same issue. When he leaves Austin, he's going up to Indiana doing the same thing. But he has free gratis agreed to come in and educate us, talk to us, see if there's some happy ground between both sides, and do it in a very effective way. I'd like to request your consideration on that, please.
How do you spell his last name?
D-U-R-R.
And is he a local resident?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, world-renowned. He's employed by NASCAR. He designs NASCAR racetracks, NFL, football stadiums, baseball stadiums. He's noted for doing many of the sound rooms up in Nashville. Right now, he's also, in addition to mitigating some of Austin's sound ordinance issues, he's also designing the new Austin City Limits stage. The guy is an expert in the field, and I feel that based on what I heard last week, I think he has a lot to offer.
So you come in and sit down and talk to our chief of police and our attorney?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
And he called me this morning and said that he would be more than happy to do so.
Can you leave us his contact information?
Certainly.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Dr. Bennett. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll go to item number 3, presentation on stormwater ecological restoration update.
We'll bring the folks from CDM up. This is a part of our Phase 2 Integrated Water Resource Plan. There's really going to be a number of installments, if you will, over the next couple months where we're going to come in and focus on some specific issues that we're working through as part of Phase 2 and give the board presentation opportunity for discussion on those items. So this is the first of those. There'll be a couple in August, and I think one we anticipate in September. So this is the start of those, and tonight we're talking specifically about some stormwater and ecological restoration related issues. So I'll let CDM and the team take it away from there.
Thanks, Eric.
No problem.
Mayor, Alderman. Glad to be back with y'all tonight. As Eric said, y'all are going to see a lot of us over the next coming work sessions, but up to this point, the updates we've done and in the public meetings, stakeholder meetings, that we've all encompassed everything. What we sort of decided to do, along with the steering committee, was to sort of break it into some components over the next couple of meetings so we can get a little bit more in depth into each of the specific ones. Mike, I know, Margaret, I've seen some of this before, being at the stakeholder meeting at the public forum that was a couple weeks ago. But Dave's going to walk through some of the stormwater and ecological restoration a little bit tonight. Just real quickly, to give you sort of an update, this is the phase work plan that we're moving through. Unlike the first phase where it was pretty interactive and went back and forth pretty quickly, we've been doing a lot of the technical portion in the bottom corner down here, have composed a lot of phase 2, really digging in deeper into a lot of the specific technical pieces, really looking more a harder look at each of the different projects we've been discussing. We have had, as I mentioned, Workshop 5, the first feedback with the stakeholder group for this process, as well as a public meeting to discuss many of the same updates on a lot of the technical projects. We've actually, we'll be moving into a second workshop in September. Once most of this technical piece, we've got a lot of feedback from y'all, hopefully over the next four discussions, and then be able to get some additional feedback from the stakeholders group before being able to come back with them and go over what, based on the Stella modeling and all the work we've done, appears to be the final plan. As Eric mentioned, this is sort of an updated date. I think we shared some of these at the public forum, but we're looking at 4 dates over the next 2 months to specifically touch on some of each of the pieces of the IWRP, and then coming back in September and sort of bringing all that together with the technical analysis, which will involve both the water quality model of the Harpeth River and the Stella model, which we've discussed previously. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dave, who's going to be covering the stormwater management portions tonight. He's enjoyed this project so much, he's closing on the house here tomorrow. So missing to move to Middle Tennessee. So.
That happens.
Yeah, thanks for the welcome. We're trying to talk to my mortgage guy today and try to find out how much I need to pay him tomorrow, but he still hasn't come up with a number yet. But anyway, as Zach said, I'm going to go through the stormwater portion of this project, and so as he said, a lot of it's been we've been doing a lot of technical work in the last couple months, and so trying not to get too deep in the weeds, but I want to give you the highlights of what we've been presenting to the stakeholders and some additional cost information that we pulled together that'll start to give you some idea of how some of these, when you start to see some of the other items, how they might compare to on a cost versus benefit relationship to some of the ones that you'll see in the next couple months. So we'll walk through these one by one, but we're going to talk a little bit about overview on stormwater management and then jump right into some of the options we've been looking at, some traditional stormwater best management practices that you all have as part of your master planning that you've done already, get into ecological restoration, so that's sort of your stream restoration and wetlands and those type of things, and then move into some of newer technologies that we were dealing with in stormwater in terms of green infrastructure. There's kind of some buzzwords in the industry that you might have heard, rainwater harvesting, and then lastly, a little bit off topic from those, but water conservation, another item that we're going to discuss tonight. So quickly on the stormwater management piece, just to give you a quick update, the city has a stormwater, MPDS stormwater permit, and so just like on the wastewater side, we have a permit that tells you how much you can discharge in terms of pollutants to the stream. On the stormwater side, you also have a permit that regulates how you manage stormwater, and so if you're not aware, you've been issued a new permit in October, which will cover the next 5 years. It talks about some of the new things that the state will require the city to do, and just some of the highlights there that folks are dealing with across the state. One is new monitoring and stream assessments for your impaired streams, and we'll show you a map of what those are, but there's 87 miles of impaired streams that have identified in the city, so there's some requirements for doing monitoring and visual stream assessments there. There's an additional effort required for the city to ensure that there's maintenance being done on a lot of the private best management practices that are out there, so doing inspections or ensuring that the customer is doing their maintenance. And then lastly, again, some of these green infrastructure things that we'll talk about, that's in the state's new permit. They want folks to start implementing. So your ordinance has already been updated to include some of these things, including the green infrastructure piece, if you recall, from late last year. And so that kicks in January of 2013. So that you'll certainly be hearing more about that. So just in terms of stormwater, what we're most concerned with is the impervious area that goes on the ground. The development is what requires us to go at and look at the pollution that's coming off of it and the additional runoff. And so here's just to give you an idea, we've got it in square feet here, but it's about 6,200 acres of impervious area in the city right now that distributed among parking, rooftops, roadways. So those are the things that we're looking to try to control and reduce the amount of runoff coming off of those. So that kind of gives us a baseline of where to move forward. Oops, I went too far here. Here's another term that you might see if you go read through your ordinance that you might see is the BMP treatment train. So these are the types of things we can do to control the runoff and the pollution coming off of that development. And so on the left-hand side, these are the things that we really can do at the source, so where it's generated. So these tend to be the more cost-effective practices, doing public information and minimizing the amount of pavement that we actually put on the ground. So those are kind of our cost-effective approach. And as we move left to right here, they get into more costly things. So putting in swales and filters and those types of things. Then moving on, putting in detention facilities to capture that stormwater before it leaves. And then lastly is more of kind of the retrofit side. So we've already built something. We didn't have controls in the past. Now maybe we're going back in and putting in controls where they weren't there before. They tend to be a little more costly. So that kind of gives you the range of options to consider. And so what we did is go through some of these and identify what information's out there now on opportunities and try to put a cost benefit to that. So our traditional stormwater best management practices, the city has done master planning over the last 10 or 12 years and identified a lot of potential best management practices that could be implemented. And so most of those plans focus really on your flooding issues. That's really what before the regulations really came along, that was really most people's focus when we dealt with stormwater. So we went back through those plans and looked at what are some of the water quality improvements that we could apply to those same facilities that are already going to give you a flood control benefit and figure out how that might help us moving forward. And the reason why is again, these impaired streams. And so here's a map of the impaired streams that the state's identified. And so all these red streams are considered impaired by TDEC. And so they've done monitoring and said they don't meet the intended standard. And so, and for all different kinds of reasons. And so what they've done in the permit is want cities to go in and start doing monitoring and figure out how they can get these impaired waters off the list. And so some of the BMPs we looked at, there's about 8 sites that we identified in those master plans that we looked at what the potential benefits of those sites were.
Yeah, being that some of those master plans are as old as
Sure.
13 years, a lot of those projects, areas that had been identified previously, some have been developed now, et cetera. So we did is we tried to look at ones that were still viable projects and that were recommended in some of the original reports.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Dave sort of went back and took some of those and looked at where could you also get some water quality benefits as well.
Right.
Okay, and so we need to say 96 East, you can see downtown, I think, but just kind of that.
Harpeth,
The Harpeth, obviously the Harpeth,
Right.
and is that Liberty Creek?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's Liberty Creek.
Watson Branch?
Donaldson,
Yeah, okay.
Watson Branch.
Yeah, Spencer Creek sort of in the north,
Right.
northeast corridor, Linwood Creek.
Is that far northeast? Is that Spencer Creek, Linwood Creek? What is that? That's not, Linwood's over on the other side.
Yeah, the northeast is Spencer, the northwest is Linwood.
Right, right,
And 5 Mile down south.
right, okay.
So when we went back and did that, one of the things we wanted to do was, again, moving forward, we want to know how these might compare to other options. So what we did is looked at your wastewater permit requires you, and that's really what's driving a lot of this, it requires you to remove a certain amount of pounds per day of different types of pollutants. So we wanted to see, well, what can our stormwater practices do and how might those compare to some of the wastewater options that we're going to talk about in the next couple months. And so here's just some numbers. I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but it gives you an idea. So just for example, on this first one on nitrogen, you're required to reduce 100 pounds per day at your wastewater plant. And so you can see just some of those 8 projects that we talked about, this is what we can get out of those. It's 7 to 15 pounds per day. It's kind of a range that what we might expect. And so as we start to put these metrics to each of these projects, we can do those comparisons as we move forward. So the numbers maybe don't mean a whole lot right now, but once you get through some of these other options, we'll be able to go back and we'll show you how they compare and match up and see which ones have the best cost, bang for the buck.
Now, is this just for the 8, or is this overall?
These are just for the 8 that we just showed there. And so, again, we're not going to go through a lot of the numbers here, but that's just going to give you some idea, and you'll see these numbers come back up later as we go through some other options. So the next piece we looked at is the ecological restoration. Again, that's more dealing with the streams and the condition of the streams. And so the first thing we did was look at all the, there's a wealth of information out there about your streams, and so we didn't really reinvent the wheel on that. We went and looked back through those. So there were previous studies that CDM had done, some of the visual stream assessments that the city staff had done after the flooding last year. They walked the creeks and looked for areas where there was degradation to the stream. HRWA had some studies, and so we took that information and said, well, what's the scale of, what's the condition of our streams right now? And we were able to identify about 26,000 feet of stream out there that are candidates for restoration or at least stabilization. And so again, we've started applying some metrics to those and see what would the cost be and what are the benefits. And so these are a suite of options that we looked at from a full stream restoration. So that's going back in and rechannelizing the stream, making sure the banks are the way they should be. And so those are kind of a more expensive options. That's kind of a wholesale fix. But we can do some cheaper things in terms of stabilization or just putting vegetation back where there wasn't any or where it was destroyed. And then some, when you get into agriculture areas, just keeping the cattle out of the stream because they tend to do a lot of damage walking in and out of the creek. So those are the types of things we considered.
So how much of that do we have? I mean, really, I'm serious. How much of that do we have on cattle?
I don't know the exact number on that specifically. I don't think I have that on here. But it's just another one of the things that we can look at as a cheap option in areas where we're seeing degradation.
This will be similar to a lot of currently I have 3 ongoing stream restoration and ecological restoration projects, which, cover about 800 feet or so apiece. But, this would be going back in some level of practice, more how you would address looking at your collection system or your water distribution system, and over a term period of time, looking at, dedicating some money to that each year to try to start in some of the worser areas and restore that bank. That'll provide that buffer zone, like Dave was talking about, that allow to help keep some more of the pollutants out. With the new permit, you also increased your buffer zone as well, which matches the new MS4 permit, which makes that 70 feet, I believe, now, as opposed to what it was.
And all of these projects would be eligible for our stormwater fees that
Yeah, I
we
think
have already-
everything we're talking about
we're
tonight
already-
would be something that could be,
Right.
would be under that existing stormwater utility MS4 program.
So we're staying inside the city limits of Franklin, and we've got cattle issues on the,
There are some areas where that's, but also we've seen some communities where they will go outside, where it may be more cost effective to look a little outside the city. We're not saying we looked at that in detail here, but there are some communities out there that say, well, it's better for us to treat upstream because it's cheaper for us to do it there than to do it in our. So a lot of times that's done through education or other types of incentives, but those are the types of options we can look at to see what the cost benefit might be and how they might compare.
That's also a program that USDA is pretty active in as well, is trying to work with a lot of the rural areas, et cetera, and try to work with, helping educate them on different practices. So there's some potential public information and other things that could be done, et cetera.
But another last thing to remember on this is these streams got the way they did because of a lot of development and lack of controls in the past. So one of the things that we also would recommend moving forward, and when you do stream restoration projects, you also want to fix the problem that caused it. So you're not just patching it and then it destroys it. So that goes back to some different types of development rules and that sort of thing. And so some of these green infrastructure pieces that the state's requiring us to do will help with that. But that's another thing to remember with these projects.
What are they doing in that picture?
They're putting in
I've
some.
never seen such a mess.
Yeah, this is.
rescuing a cow.
I think that's actually a Boy Scout project where they were doing some stream restoration along the
Yeah.
Harpeth River, I believe. I'm not.
Yeah.
That's one of Dory's projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually, I guess, an Eagle Scout project that was done in conjunction with Harpeth River Watershed.
This is a very low-tech method.
Yeah.
It's very effective.
But there's certainly, besides the pollution, there's certainly some other benefits associated with stream restoration. So again, helping filter the runoff is one of the key things, but also improves the habitat in the area and also for aesthetic reasons. So you see, again, the greenway running by the creek there could be a public safety issue as well. So there's a lot of benefits to stream restoration besides just the pollutant removal. So it is another one of the items that's not on the table to consider.
And I think that's a key thing to remember too. If you recall, we had 9 specific options that were developed by the stakeholders committee, and 2 of those were to provide a more recreational and aesthetic benefit of the Harpeth. And a lot of this goes back into not only from a pollutant standpoint, but also making it truly the center of the town and making it a place that is a benefit to all citizens, and also make it a more usable, which is also, that was 2 of the specific options that were developed by the stakeholders. So although they weren't as high ranking as some of the others, it still comes into effect of how it affects those 2 options as well.
So here's briefly some of the numbers that we put together on the stream restoration piece that we looked at. So again, we mentioned that 26,000 feet of stream. The cost estimates we did on repairing or stabilizing or restoring those reaches is about $12 million. So again, we apply, what's the pollutant removal and what's the cost benefit. So you can see these are quite a bit higher than the other options. So again, that starts to give us some metrics to look at to say, well, which one's more cost effective? If we have limited dollars, where should we spend them? So those, again, are the types of benchmarks we're going to look at with the other projects and see how they all stack up in terms of just the cost of pollutant removal and then some of these other more qualitative type benefits. This next piece, again, is sort of a kind of a newer strategy and something that EPA is really pushing, but this is green infrastructure. So what types of things do we look at? And so some of the terms you'll see and some of the options we considered are one is bioretention and infiltration. So that's usually putting in types of, a lot of it's integrated into your landscape, and so instead of having, you're in a parking lot, instead of having a raised median where the water can't get in to irrigate the tree, you may have a depressed median so that the stormwater can run right off, there's no curb, get in and then infiltrate into the ground rather than into a catch basin.
And we're doing that now. We're doing that now, right?
Yeah, and so those types of things are now in the city's permit, and again, they kick in as requirements for development in 2013. But they have multitude of benefits, and so I'm not going to go through them all here, but they can provide some benefits in terms of how much water you might use. You maybe don't have to irrigate as much if you're allowing the rainwater to do it for you. Another piece we looked at was rainwater harvesting, and so that's capturing runoff from the rooftop, using it for irrigation on site and in place of potable water. So those are a couple case studies we did on these. In this case, because it is a little bit newer strategy, there's not a lot of detail on the information out there on the cost. It's something we're still gathering, but we did want to show you just a couple case studies that we looked at. One is, one example we considered was, well, what if the city were to consider looking at, applying some of these strategies to the municipal sites, and what types of benefit could we receive there? And so on the municipal properties, you have about 156 acres of impervious area, and so you said, well, what if we were able to retrofit 50% of that? And so you can see, the pretty significant capture of rainwater. You capture 103 million gallons annually of rainwater that can be, in some cases, can be reused, or it doesn't, or the pollutants associated with that don't get to the creek. So we're still doing some more calculations on these, but these are the types of case studies we're looking at to try to show you some cost benefit and some options to consider along with the integrated plan. Rainwater harvesting, this is something you're probably a little more familiar with because this is something that the city is already doing at the police headquarters. So you have cisterns out there that are capturing that rainwater and you're reusing it for irrigation. So again, we looked at what's the potential of doing something like that across the municipal properties in the city. And so again, there's a significant capture here on an annual basis, 57 million gallons. If you look at the average rainfall and what you could capture, so we can look at how that might reduce our potable water demand. And so that's another case study.
Can I ask you, talking about municipal facilities, I was thinking of that as like buildings like this, or are you talking, what else are you talking
Right,
about?
I mean, I think some of the big things that could be a lot of bang for your buck that we're specifically look at is maybe, for instance, the 2 parking garages downtown. If you captured all the rainwater that fell on those and reused those to irrigate some of the downtown areas, et cetera. Obviously, just like the police station, it's a lot less expensive, as Dave said, a lot of these practices, if you do them, as part of the original construction as opposed to trying to retrofit. But it does give us a way to compare doing some of these projects, what we can reduce from maybe a water consumption loading, as well as from a nitrogen and phosphorus loading and sediment loading to the streams, comparatively to what it may cost you to do other things within the city. So,
Gosh, a 2% reduction is huge, in my opinion.
there's a lot of things that if
Because
you look at it as a
how
whole,
much don't we have, like 7 or 8 million gallons per day?
of existing use of
Yeah.
water
That's going to take
treatment wells.
2% of that?
Yeah, and that's,
I'd like to hear that one. I mean, really, I'm serious. That would be pretty amazing.
The last case study we did on the green rainwater harvesting was, look not just at the municipal side, but we see in some cities where they apply it to a neighborhood. So the city may go out and provide rain barrels to be installed in a neighborhood to capture runoff from the rooftop. So again, can be a cheap option to look at. In this case, we just applied it to the Chestnut Bend neighborhood, and at a cost of about $22,000, these can be installed at these on this scale, and you're only, instead of paying for potable water, they may be able to, they're getting it at a cost much cheaper. So these are the types of options that we're looking at to show as case studies in the integrated plan, so we can start to again benchmark how they might compare to others. So,
Obviously, the key to the rain barrel program is public education and
Right.
making sure they're used correctly. I mean, if they stay filled up and they just overtop every time it rains and they are actually used, it's not saving you a lot. But these are things that have been implemented in other places and can be looked
I
at.
asked you this before
Sure.
because I have a rain barrel
Right.
and it stays full. But I don't know what to do with the water when it rains.
You water
I mean-
your garden.
Right, you got water, you got,
The rain is watering it.
yeah, but you water it in between like this. When we
gets
have
the
these
dry
2 weeks
spell.
of dry spells, then you utilize your rain barrel to water your garden in the meantime, as
Should
opposed
you
to.
just leave it on all the time? Leave that hose running all the time?
Well, you don't want to leave it all the time. When it's raining, you hope that you're filling up your barrel. And then when it's filled up and it's not raining, then you can utilize your hose to drain out of it. So it is good for capturing. I mean, you're still getting some pollutant reduction just by capturing as opposed to just letting it run off your property, so.
We'll call Bob and get him to I think that's what you're
About you
asking.
every time it rains.
Go back to the.
That sounds like a lyric
To the
of some
22,000.
of our musician friends.
The 22,000 is what again now?
That would be the cost for the city to provide those barrels to.
For 185
two
homes?
barrels per house.
Are they on city water or is it another system?
No, they're on city water.
Yeah, don't take Chestnut, that would just happen to be.
No,
the one-
no,
that just
they're on
happened to be
city
one
water.
we
They're on
chose
city
to
water,
look
yeah.
at.
It might be one of the other systems that might get a
Chestnut
greater
Bend's not.
incentive. yeah.
City?
No, Chester is not one of the ones on the other system.
Yeah.
Chester
Okay.
Bend's on the city
That-
So I
water.
mean, really, it's once again twofold, which most of the stormwater is hopefully reducing your water demand.
Right.
At the same time, also reducing the runoff potential of loading to whatever stream and ultimately the Harpeth River, so.
So does it settle out in the rain barrel, is that it?
Well, you're going to get some settling, obviously, of large pollutants, but once you then water during dry times, instead of that water just wanting to sheet flow across your property, it's going to want to infiltrate and actually be utilized, which are at the same time, that phosphorus and nitrogen then provides a natural fertilizer as opposed to having to go out and
Right.
put fertilizer in your yard, which also can run off and cause issues, so.
Last piece here, we looked at a little bit off the subject of stormwater, but another piece that I've been helping out with is the water conservation piece. So again, we looked at some different effective measures for communities like Franklin, where we've implemented or where other communities have been successful implementing them. So things we looked at were hardware replacements. So that's the city offering incentives for installing low-flow shower heads, high-efficiency toilets, those types of things. Those are really popular these days. Also, irrigation technology is another one we're going to be looking at, and that would be putting sensors in your yard so that instead of your sprinklers turning on 10 o'clock every day, they only turn on when the ground needs it. So there's going to be sensors out there that can do that, and so that's another thing we can look at. Education is always a big piece here, as we just talked about, and how to use these measures properly. Do different kinds of audits and accountability for either commercial properties or even within the city. And then lastly, be looking at your rate structure and how that can be structured to provide a disincentive for using too much water. So those are the types of options that we're going to be looking at under the water conservation piece. So one of the case studies I wanted to bring to you today was the hardware replacement. Well, here's some benefits here real quick. Again, some of the big things we look at is reduction in operation and maintenance costs. Lower use of energy for pumping, less chemicals that the city's got to use to treat water. Reduces potential to reduce the amount of purchase that you may make for wholesalers. So if your customers aren't using as much, you don't have to buy as much from the people you get it from. And lastly, delaying some large capital facility costs. If you can reduce your demand on water, that maybe 10 years more you can wait to upgrade your water plant. So there's some real benefits here, and so again, we wanted to show some at least one option to consider. Again, one of the popular ones right now is providing rebates for high efficiency toilets, and so A lot of communities we see, like Franklin, we will offer a rebate for customers to come in. And they can go purchase a toilet that has a certain efficiency. The city will pay them a rebate for that, and then they're reducing the amount of water that they're going to use. And so we looked at a couple of different scenarios and said, well, what's the potential participation there, ranging from 25 to 75%. And again, so you can see some pretty big annual savings on water if folks upgrade their toilets to higher efficiency units. So again, we've got a benchmark down here that we're going to be, this is a potential savings on this option, but these are some of the things we'll compare to some of their other options to see how they stack up. So that's really the main options that we've looked at so far, and we're certainly open to hearing other ones that you have in mind, or again from your steering committee might have in mind as we move forward. But that's kind of the type of information you'll see from some of the other things in the next couple weeks. So.
I think a key thing that we want to remind you too on the stormwater and ecological restoration, water conservation piece, different from the water side or the reuse somewhat, but definitely from the water and wastewater. It's not only just a capital driven type decisions, but there's also a lot of policy decisions there as well. There's a lot of things from a policy standpoint that will make some recommendations, throw some ideas out there that you can have the option of looking at as a board that may be a no-cost solution. I mean, obviously it is passing down some sort of policy or regulation on the citizens, but at the same time may be a good benefit for the city as a whole. So.
Just a couple of things. Hasn't our water use gone down in the last 3 years? At least the
We've
last
had a
things?
decline in consumption from 2005 through 2010. Last year we did see some recovery in consumption, but on average we're consuming less per customer than we have
5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago.
And I really think a lot of that is education too. I mean, Mark has the Water Hog Water Conservation Program as well. I think we discussed it before that, you get to the children and the children seem to really tie that back to their parents and adults. And I think over the last 10, 15 years nationally, we've seen that become more of a priority.
I had a really neat thing happen today. A grandfather called and wanted to know where he could take his grandchildren who are coming to visit this weekend. He wanted to take them to a bridge that had running water under it so they could play the poo stick game. And I sent them to Pinkerton Park over the Sue Berry Bridge because there's no road there, so they didn't have to run back and forth across the road. So that's a really neat thing. Get them away from the computers and the television and send them out to the water.
They're dying to know what the poo stick game is.
Oh, does everybody not know what that is? That's when the children get on one side, they tie a ribbon around their stick, throw it in and run to the other side, and whoever's stick comes out first wins that game.
So it's like a race.
Yeah.
Spoken like a true school
Winnie the
teacher.
Pooh does that. That's really important. Winnie the Pooh.
You got to get it in the high flowing. You got to get in the high flowing. Maybe it's in the new movie. I don't know.
Would you include that in your report, please?
But I mean I think that's one of the things I think you hit on a part that really came through in a lot of the stakeholders group too, is that and that's sort of what we've been looking at. We wanted to make the Harpeth River, and we have since the beginning of the Stella, when we started the Stella Maris, making that the center of really where all this ties back together. And it is a great water resource the city has, and I think that's what came through with the stakeholders is, not only does it have some benefits from a water, wastewater, stormwater standpoint, but it also is a great recreational and use piece that we need to take more advantage of as a city as well. So.
I've got a couple questions for you concerning what's going on in the federal level with our water, because there's been a lot of activity lately with some bills passed that haven't been really that great, and there's a lot of implications from some of these bills that we're not too sure how that's going to be coming down the pipe. One, of course, is the Clean Water Act, and that I want to know a little bit about that and how this affects all of that. And then the other one that I'm curious about is for years in the western states, it has been illegal to catch rainwater, and it's outlawed. And individuals can't do it. In fact, there's a case in Utah just recently about a car wash that was cited and fined heavy fines for collecting rainwater in rain barrels and using it to wash cars with. There's a lot of restricting laws coming down from Congress, and I'm real concerned about some of those things and how the federal government even wants to tax your ability to catch rainwater. So what do you know about that, and how does that affect our level here on a local level?
All right, I'll touch on the first one, and Katie, if you have anything you'd like to add. But actually, as far as the water regulations, I was at a meeting with Tom Curtis, who's the Director of Governmental Affairs for AWA. He works out of Washington, D.C., and he did a presentation that I was at back in April when I was in West Virginia at a regional meeting I was at. And you're right, that from what his exact statement was, there's never been more of a directive to pass water regulations over the last 30 years than there is right now, since the original implementation of the Clean Water Act. There really hasn't been a lot of new regulations in place, and there's a big push right now, especially from a lot of the senators and representatives on national level, to do more of that. Once again, like most things that come down from EPA or from Congress, they're going to be unfunded mandates. It's going to be things that are going to be directed down on municipalities to meet without any additional funding. If anything, the funding is less now than it ever has been. I mean, EPA has actually been put to a halt on a lot of their funding sources they've been putting out. Perchlorate, hexavalent chromium, the fluoride issue, which continues to float around. I don't know what other big ones are out there, but I know those three. There's a big push. Even though EPA's chemist and the research doesn't document that it needs to be done, there's a lot of look that Congress itself may pass some of these things without even going through the process that's been developed for EPA through the Clean Water Act to implement some of these things. So I definitely agree with you. Some of the stormwater regulations we talked about tonight, they're only going to get, as usual, they're only going to get much more stringent. In the 2015 permit, the city can expect that it's going to be much more stringent. I thoroughly believe, and I'll let Dave comment one way or the other. He knows a lot more about it. But I think before most of us are gone, we'll see treatment of stormwater in some way, shape, or capacity in the United States, much like you have in water and wastewater. As the point sources, they continue to tighten the point sources, much like they've done here with you at your wastewater plants. There's only so much more they can do from a point source standpoint. So they're going to start looking at these non-point sources, and they're going to put it on cities and people that they can try to, put their finger down on to try to make it do that. As far as the rain barrels, I mean, it is a little different situation. I'll let Dave respond. In the West, water is such a resource and they don't want anybody, it's parceled out, and people basically own the water when it comes to the Colorado River, et cetera. And so it's such a resource. It's a little bit different atmosphere. I don't really know from a national atmosphere how that.
Granted, I know that's the West, but granted, look at Georgia.
Yeah.
Right,
And look
right.
at all the problems we've had, especially with droughts, and we have cycles of weather. And we're going to experience these droughts and things, and we've already been doing that.
There's some really good reads. There's some really good reads out there. I think you've hit on that water is the next goal. I mean, it is what is going to drive development and growth and resources over the next 100 years.
Yeah, and a lot of these practices, especially the green infrastructure type practices, where instead of maybe using a rain barrel, but again, developing your landscape to capture that water as opposed to letting it discharge onto the street, is very successfully used in the West, Phoenix area, LA, and so they're doing a lot of programs to again change the way they develop the land so that less of the water leaves site, but it's actually providing natural irrigation to your plants and landscape. So, but they are, the rain barrel programs still are pretty successful out west. There may be certain areas where there have been lawsuits, but I know in a lot of cases they do them successfully there as well. So, but there can be issues with the water rights are very different in the West than they are here. The law itself is different. So,
it certainly is.
And what it does,
I'm not arguing that point. I'm just concerned with, in your studies, if you considered this and keeping track of what's going on, because there's a lot of laws restricting property owners from diverting water and catching water. And then the federal government is actually, and I've talked to Congressman Marsha Blackburn and a couple other congressmen about this, that, they really do start, Margaret catches her rainwater in her barrels, and she's going to be taxed for that, catching that water.
No, ask.
No, I'm not, because it stays in the barrel.
I mean,
As long as you catch it, honey. You're gonna
you
get-
know.
But, and
It's
I'm
not that
I'm
far
not
from-
trying to be dramatic here.
Right.
I'm just trying to say, what do you, considerations we take into this, and how do we monitor that?
Right.
I mean, it seems that it's sort of bizarre, right? But I think we've got some.
I mean, we're trying, obviously, we're trying to look out 30 years is the plan through this process. So we're trying to take into account any a bit of regulations. On the water side, we've definitely started looking at a lot of the things that you've talked about. But, we'll try to, look into the future as best we can with our crystal ball and figure out where that may take us. But we'll do some more research on some of the stuff you've been talking about, and we'll get back with you on
Is there someone in your organization that monitors the legislation
Yes.
constantly, you
Yes.
said? And then,
And we also state,
Address
through
the-
organizations we're involved with
Okay.
too, which many of your staff are as well, there's a lot of national organizations that really monitor this stuff from a water, wastewater,
right, that
stormwater
you tap
standpoint.
into.
As we move through these other presentations, you're going to see that's one of the elements that works its way through all the considerations is where's the regulatory environment going? And CDM, our stakeholder team, our staff team, all have different, bring a lot of those different perspectives to the table. And so you're going to see that work through everything we look at, not only what are our needs, but what are the regulatory requirements we can reasonably expect to be placed upon us as we move forward. So this,
And the costs associated.
that's absolutely all part of
That's
it.
huge.
That's all part of this planning process. So you're going to see that worked in to really all aspects as we go through this, and that's all part of the study as well.
I just wanted to bring that up.
Last question.
The last stakeholder meeting was very informative, and it's very worthwhile. If the other aldermen ever have time to attend one of these, you get a lot more information than what they're
Yeah,
able.
I mean, it's hard to pack all this into these little updates we
To-
have,
to give you
obviously.
to your
And,
stuff.
we will for sure give y'all as much notice as we can on that day.
That's what I was
As soon as
gonna ask.
we'll send y'all out the invite to that at the same time we invite the stakeholders. I think tentatively that's scheduled in September, maybe late September right now, so.
And there's also some, yeah,
28?
I'm sorry, what day did you say?
Of what month?
September 28th.
Will it be at the police community?
Problem.
and we've also been developing
13th.
some technical
28th.
memos.
28th of September.
Support
Yeah, that's-
this
yeah, that's another
information
good-
that'll be available as well to read. through and
Yeah,
have
we're
all the
working with,
background.
Mark to get, as we develop each of these little pieces, we've developed sort of technical memorandums that back a lot of the background and calculations, et cetera, that go along with a lot of these. And they'll be, they're starting to put those up on the Integrated Water Resource Plan website on the water management departments here with the City of Franklin. So a lot of the information as well is out there as well that you can read at your leisure. So, and anytime, if any of you have any specific questions or like to sit down and discuss anything, feel free to contact myself or Chris or anyone else you can get a hold of.
One of my questions was answered about the meeting. The other thing is, can we have this presentation sent
Sure.
to us also?
We'll send that out too.
Thank you.
And we've been
We'll
loading
post it on the
these.
website
Yeah.
as well.
Right, but still, it's
Sure.
easier if it just sit to us,
Yep.
if you don't
We'll send it
mind.
to
We'll
you.
be glad to do that.
That would be good.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you
Great
very
job.
much.
Okay, item number 4, consideration of change order number 2 with the Parks Companies Incorporated for the McEwen Drive Phase 3 project for an increase of $22,770.
This is a $22,000 change order. A month or so ago, a couple months ago, you had provided us with an additional project contingency of $100,000. But we would like to do this change order directly because it helps us allocate it to the state funding. So we need the board approval of the specific $22,000 change order to help us basically include it or allocate it towards the state funding as well.
Fine. Needs more rebar, more structure.
More report, more structure.
Very good.
Who
Yes.
can say no to that? Really.
Make it
We
stronger.
can say no to allocating it to the state, that's what I think.
Number 5,
Let me
do you have
ask
a question?
Yeah. I was just thinking, I made myself a note here, given all the heavy rains in the last 2 months, and the fact that, what they were talking about in here, what else did they want besides the rebar? What was it?
There's erosion control that
Yeah.
is needed.
Okay, we've had, I don't know, it seems to me a little late. Aren't they, the erosion over there, I've been looking at that, with all that rain and everything, isn't this sort of like closing the barn door after the horse has been out?
No,
'Cause
it's
we've all
not.
had
No,
that,
we
and then
have
they're going in
erosion.
there and they're tearing it all back up.
They're going to have to rearrange erosion control as they do the project, and it is not after the fact. We're getting the erosion control in as we need it, but we do need to get some more money because of the fact that it's taken longer to do this particular part of the work.
So there's erosion control in the original contract, the base
Right.
project.
Right.
This provides additional based on the additional time needed.
Okay, so they're not going to be putting that in and then tearing it all back up again. That's what I'm,
It's all part of the
The erosion
construction
control, well,
project.
the erosion control doesn't stay forever. It
Right.
is in and then it's out, and we'll have to change it, but with what's happened is we've had to get more, or spend more money on it because it's open, or it's not stabilized as quickly because of the situation we had with the bridge.
Yeah.
So we've got to get more monies for it. So it's
Okay.
not after the
I
fact,
was
it's just trying to get
curious.
the
It
monies
just
to
seemed
cover
me,
it.
when I was over there the other day, I thought, oh, yeah, okay.
Number 5, consideration of liquor license retailer certificate for a new owner of Del Rio Wine and Spirits. Any questions on that? Consideration, number 6, consideration of liquor license retailer certificate for a new store, Franklin Wine and Spirits.
No problems.
No problems.
Where is 1400?
That's in McKaysville,
Oh,
next to
okay,
Publix.
I see.
Okay, and number 7 is pulled, is my understanding.
Yeah, we are still getting back the actual agreement itself, so we'd like to hold that for 2 weeks.
Okay, number 8, consideration of ordinance 2011-28, an ordinance to amend Chapter 3, Section 3.2.2 and Section 3.2.3, Table 3.2, permitted uses in the Franklin zoning ordinance to permit detached dwelling units in the neighborhood mixed unit zoning district. Wow, you got up here quick.
That's why we put those long
This
titles
caption
in
was
there.
too long.
Yes, it definitely is. This is another in the series of text amendments. What we noticed is that there was not detached residential allowed in the neighborhood mixed-use district, and we think it was an oversight in the 2008 zoning ordinance, because really, for a variety district, a mixed-use neighborhood district, detached should be allowed.
All right,
A single-family
no-brainer.
residence should definitely be allowed. So we wanted to make that correction.
All righty.
Everybody good?
Yes.
Thank you, Catherine. Number 9, consideration of agreement between the city and the Harpeth River Watershed Association for the restoration of a portion of the Harpeth River in the general area of River Mile 88.9. Mr. Parker.
Well, let me start off with saying that we're not here to ask you to be ready to approve this agreement at this point. It is a draft agreement. We have sent it to the Harpeth River. They do have some comments they want to have. We do know we have some additions we have to do to meet the grant requirements from, who's the grant with? Fish and Wildlife.
Federal government.
Federal government, yes.
The U.S.
But this is all about, this has been discussed with the board on several occasions as far as the removal of the Lowhead Dam and stream, or the Harpeth River bank restoration in that general area. That's what this is all about. It is a part of our NPDES withdrawal permit for our water plant, that we have to look at this and we have to remove the dam if it's feasible. What has happened is the Harpeth River Watershed Association has contracted with Beaver Creek to do a design that is feasible to allow for the removal of the Lowhead Dam. Staff has looked at the plans. We're comfortable with what is being proposed. It will provide us with a pool level that we can withdraw and meet the requirements, or meet our requirements for water, plus meet the requirements for the withdrawal NPDES permit. What we're looking at now is, as I said, Harpeth River has a grant for $350,000, but the project is quite a bit more than that. And we're looking at an agreement between the two entities, which is the city and Harpeth River Watershed Association. They will be using, they will be overseeing the grant. We will be using the design that they have contracted for, and that design, et cetera, is being paid for out of the grant. We will have to do additional funding. In fact, as far as going forward to get the project going, the city of Franklin will have to commit that we're going to ensure that all additional funding is available. Now, we are going to go forward. In fact, we have a meeting scheduled next week, I think it is, 21st, with TDEC. We are going forward to see if we can get an agreement with TDEC, Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation, for some work that they would help fund that would reduce the amount of money that the city of Franklin would have to spend. We'll also be looking at some other in-kind services, one being like getting out of the tree bank some of the trees that are necessary, things like that. However, that is not something that is firmly established at this point. So therefore, that's the reason the agreement is being written, that the city is going to obligate itself to all the rest of the funding above $350,000. All of this work, the total cost of this work actually is looking at a cost that's right around the estimate that was produced for us by our consultant 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
3 years ago.
When we were looking at a low head dam removal. So it's still going to be overall cost about the same.
How much is that?
It's right under $1 million.
So the 480 chair?
So it's right under $1 million total cost for.
About $830,000.
So, but what we're doing in this, it's actually getting more work than what that would have been, because other than just looking at removing the dam, this is going to be some stream bank restoration on the Harpeth River for about, was it 2,000 feet or something?
Yeah, that.
About 2,000 feet.
About 2 miles of river that get restored.
Right, so we're getting a better benefit, but this is something that staff has looked at. We've been discussing this, as you're well aware, for a couple of years probably, but at least over a year as far as what we want to do. We're at a point we want to come to you with an agreement. We have, like I said, the agreement needs some work. We got a few things we still got to square away. Our city attorney has just glanced at it as all at this point, but we wanted to get it before you to see if you're still in agreement with us carrying forward with this project, working with Harpeth River Watershed Association through an agreement, pursuing getting another agreement with TDEC to where we can cut our ultimate cost. So that, I think that's about basically what we need to say concerning it, but.
Yeah, I would just add, when we brought this forward about a year or so ago, the big question came back from the board was essentially do no harm as it relates to water withdrawal from the river.
Got it.
And that was the primary question. We've looked at that further. Our staff has looked at that along with the engineering group and feel comfortable that we can move forward with that and say that question's been answered affirmatively, that yes, this project will provide sufficient withdrawal capabilities. It does not put us in any worse position to do this. It also gives us an opportunity to partner with TDEC, with Harpeth River Watershed Association, sorry, and accomplish some other improvements similar to what we just talked about in terms of ecological impact, other positives. So I think when we look at it, it's at that stage where we can continue to move forward, but we wanted to check in with you. Ultimately, the way this works is, yes, there's the grant, yes, there's a good possibility TDEC participates in a significant manner, but at the end of the day, the city is the entity that is responsible for delivering the project and filling whatever gaps there are. And Dory and some of the other partners are also looking at identifying other in-kind participation that could help lessen the city's cost impact. But at the end of the day, we are the ones that will fill those gaps financially and are responsible for seeing that the project gets delivered. But this is at a stage to bring it back to you to get some input. It's a good working draft. There are some elements, as David mentioned, that we've got to still round out and get further feedback on, and we'll then bring that back to you. We also want to get a little further along with TDEC and understand where they are too, so we have a feeling of how the different pieces are going to fit together as you get ready to give us further direction on this.
The one thing, additional thing I do want to mention, as far as the main issue that we've got to get into this contract, or agreement, is from the grant, which the requirement is that we're going to ensure that we're going to maintain the improvements for 10 years.
Wow.
It's kind of like it's what you're saying when you do a conservation easement, that you're going to keep it at whatever. We're going to have to, as a part of this, then agree that we're going to maintain for at least 10 years.
Yeah.
So that's
It's a
the part.
low-maintenance project.
Right.
In other words, don't go near tear out what gets built, you're done.
We have to have that in all of our agreements, or any agreement as far as using, that are in conjunction with using the grant monies for the work. So that's something we'll have to add to.
And there's some level of maintenance and oversight anticipated in the project as well, beyond the construction only. There's, I don't know, 5 years or so.
5 years of monitoring and
How do
replacement.
we know the cost of that 10-year maintaining?
It's low
I
maintenance.
mean, I know
If
it's
it's all
low,
been
I
built
know.
into the budget.
Rocks.
We have 5 years worth of
But-
inspection and maintenance built into the budget. Anything, once 5 years, the anticipation, of course, is that the growth is going to keep you from having to spend very much money. This minimum cost then after that. So that's what we're looking at. But this is something, anytime you do something like this, you have that 5-year period that you have to go through a monitoring and maintenance period.
Alderman Skinner.
Finally.
I'm sorry.
I was asked by the Harpeth River Watershed Association to serve on advisory board for this project. And I was really impressed with the meeting that we had. It's been over a month now. Of some of the other stakeholders, TDEC and those people, how enthusiastic they were for this. And they were already working out ways that they could do in kind and help with materials and storage or rock or whatever we needed. So, and again, if we look at the Metcalf-Eddy study, that just to take down the Lowhead Dam was going to be $280,000. And we're going to get this and a major restoration project for a little more.
And you get to continue to withdraw water. Because if you just took the dam out, it wasn't designed to be able to continue to withdraw water.
Right, and that was one of the points that TDEC made, that's part of our withdrawal, was that we agreed to take down the dam. Well, eventually we have to renew that, and that it would be a good thing to have this plan either finished or at least started before we have to ask for another withdrawal permit.
And what we're working with TDEC on is something we have an agreement with TDEC already, which is called the Harpeth River Watershed Initiative. We entered into this 5 years or so ago, and we already have a project, well actually 2, but the Eastern Flank Battlefield Park restoration, stream restoration, where we took out the lakes, etc. It was done under the same type of arrangement, so it would be a similar type of arrangement as we had in that. So that's what we'll be looking at, is using as far as our model for how we go forward with TDEC. But that's something we did.
This is
like I
something
said,
they've
several years
always,
ago.
they really wanted to do. And so even though Paul Sloan's not there anymore, you still have the new deputy director and the new director of TDEC very committed to this project. So we just need to nail it down. And the only other thing I wanted to, we've sort of said a number of things, but if you would like to come out to the site, we can show you sort of what's happening, because there will be some trees coming down. None of the neighbors will be able to see that. Those will be replanted, but those are things I think you all might want to get a good feel for during the construction of the project, because there'll be some earth moved. Just like anything else when you do renovation, the house gets messy. So getting a sign up and having that information on websites and all that so people know what they're seeing. And the timing of the project right now, the grant ends September 2012. That's why we need to get this in motion so that those dollars can be spent on time. And that lines up almost exactly with when the permit's up. So everything kind of has fallen into place.
And our expectation would be the city would likely bid this sometime around the first quarter of 2012, calendar year 2012. So that's kind of what we're working towards at this point, and that would make sense in terms of the implementation and timing that we would need to hit all those deadlines.
Great.
And it also becomes a little cheaper because, to Alderman Barnhill's point, the analysis found that because of the nature of where the pump was put in the river and where the dam was, it turns out it's in a low point. So nothing needs to be done to the intake structure at all in order to do this project. And then if you decide to increase the drinking water withdrawal rates, like put in larger pumps, the whole design of the project enables all that. So a lot of stuff's been thought through. So you're not getting into it boxed into any kind of situation.
And so the money then from the city, obviously there'll be some stormwater implications, but this is not mainly a stormwater project, is it?
No, it is mainly a water project, but there will be, that's something we haven't really gotten down to making a final determination of where all the funding is going to come from, or how much is going to come from what fund. But there will be a shared thing from the stormwater fund and the water fund.
And this is one of those costs we know to anticipate as part of the integrated water resource planning process. This is going to be something that will be considered in that program as well.
But if we were just to do this without the stream restoration and all that, it would be strictly water fund.
So when it happens, get ready for a lot of national press, because you'll have the Fish and Wildlife Service and all these other partners who, this is their big project. This is their top priority project right now. So they're looking, and there may not be any more funding for fish passage and habitat protection, frankly. So we don't want to not use the grant.
Just had one other question. Kind of where are the main tree removals coming from?
If you go down and look at the location, if you go down and stand where everybody walks down those stone down, some of those trees will be coming out in order to drop the level of the riverbank about 5 feet in order to make more of a bench. There's a little bit of slowing the river down and some flood storage, and then the trees will be replanted.
There's going to be a benching in the bank on the
So it says river like this, it
Pike
goes
side
up.
of the river, so the trees in through there will be coming.
And it won't be so steep that you can't get your cattle in there.
Yeah, all those cattle. But as I said, I can take you all out there. We
No,
thought
but
that we
that
could-
would be good to know, because that does back up to some areas that.
Yeah,
are
it's actually
close
backs
to
up
me.
on Sturbridge Point and one other, but none of those, from someone living there, they won't be able to see this project even while we do it. But,
That was,
yeah,
But
of
the
course,
other
a
good
concern.
thing is what we take out, we get to use in the bank
right, so we don't have to.
as
haul
part
it.
of the stabilization, so.
Most of it's kind of an all self-contained project.
But again, whenever you replant trees, they don't necessarily have the same cover, whenever they are new as,
Right, there's not much cover, unfortunately,
That-
right
that-
there anyway,
that's-
but you're
that's what I was
absolutely right.
thinking.
That's why we're trying to refurbish that as well.
that's the reason I was asking specifically
And
about
some
the
of them are falling
location.
in, so they're
Yeah,
gone.
yeah.
And the other thing this does is, instead of being a steep bank, there'll be a bench bank there, and people will feel like they have better access down there than through that steep bank cut.
It's going to be designed so you can actually go like this and walk down, so it can almost be handicap accessible, interestingly enough. But then you don't have to hurt your back dropping your canoe down the bank. And the structure that goes in is really, really shallow, unlike the 6-foot dam now, so you can paddle and ride inner tube, you can go through there safely after this is done versus the way it is now.
Everybody good? Let's go on to
Okay.
another interesting topic. Thanks.
Oh, absolutely.
Next is consideration of bond resolution for refunding, which is something we discussed in Budget and Finance last night, and a good number of us were there. But I think that you've got a chart that we're going to look at. I won't comment about some were asleep, but basically, this is what you're going to be looking for. It says page 11 at the bottom, options for refunding. So, Russ, have at it.
Yeah, we wanted to follow up with the full board tonight on the discussion we had last night, and as Mayor Moore said, it was a good discussion, covered a lot of the details here and the decision that's before us. And I wanted to have Russ just briefly walk through the different elements of this, go over this with you, and then update you on a couple other developments that we have. We have some more information for you that I think will help you in terms of the timing and the process that's going on. So I'll let Russ kind of walk through these, and then have a little more discussion and get any other feedback you have that might help us as we move forward on this decision.
For those of you that were not there last night and for the listening audience, for some time we've been looking at slowly and methodically refunding some of the variable rate debt that we have outstanding. Some of that debt came to us during the financial meltdown when we went out and borrowed some money for water and sewer projects immediately after the drought, and then for some other projects that we had in the general fund. We were able to do some refunding last year, and we're getting ready to do another one at this point, and we have a recommendation from our financial advisor and from staff to go ahead and refund the $20 million in the water and sewer fund. What you have in front of you are 4 different ways that we can actually accomplish that.
And let me just add that just under $20 million is the entirety of variable debt that we have in the water and sewer project, water and sewer funds. So this would move us to all fixed rate debt in that component.
Our other variable rate is in the general.
We have the other.
We identified 4 methods of doing this refunding. The first 2 are the ones that we've had for many, many years, and that is either by a competitive sale or by a negotiated sale. Sometimes in the case of refunding, much like the one that we did last September, October, because of market conditions, you want to go ahead and do a negotiated sale where you have some control over the timing of the sale. In this case, we don't think that the competitive sale, the negotiated sale fits the circumstances that we have right now. So we've more or less eliminated that, which is your second line. There's 2 new wrinkles, though, that we have that we haven't had in prior years. You know, because banks have struggled to find borrowers for some of the capital that they have, some of the money that is lendable, they have reached out and they're looking at municipalities. So direct loans from banks are now something that is more viable than it has ever been in the past. Could always be done, but there was really not an interest on the part of cities or on banks to do that. And we can execute a refunding that way in one of 2 ways, directly with the bank, or we can go through the municipal bond fund, who has access to banks through their letter of credit programs that they have for many of their loans, including the one that will be refunded. PFM went out and got some indicative rates from the banks as far as a direct loan, and as you can see in the second column on the bottom row, those prices are going to be much higher than any of the other 3 methods. So we more or less ruled that out. So we're down to really 2 possibilities. One is the competitive sale, which is the ordinary way that we would generate new borrowing in a competitive sale, in that we would go out, we'll announce we're going to sell on such and such a date. Our financial advisor makes all the arrangements. We go to the rating agencies. We tell them all the things about us. They give us a rating. We disclose that to the market, and we sell on a date that we pick in the future. The problem with that is we don't know what the market will be at that date in the future. That's why from time to time you would use negotiated rates.
And a competitive sale, we estimate, will take us about 60 days from a decision to go forward to execute that. So you're looking at a 60-day time frame to get that done.
And that's where the fluctuation could
That's
come.
where we don't know what might happen out in the markets that could impact where we are today.
Right. The alternative to that is to take advantage of this proposal from the Municipal Bond Fund, who again has the loan right now. And what they have done is they've gone to a bank and they've gotten a proposal that's good for a limited time at a slightly higher rate than what we think we could get today in the competitive market. The problem with the competitive market is we don't know what it'll be 60 days hence. And where we do have this number of 338 as a fixed rate percentage through the bond fund. There are numerous other parameters and uncertainties that you have to take into consideration. The bond fund is proposing that we do this on a bank qualified basis, which, without going into gory details, it makes it easier for banks to buy it because they get certain tax credits, but we can only issue $10 million a year. Cities can only go up to $10 million a year and have it be bank qualified. So we would have to split the issuance. If we agreed to do this through the bond fund, we would do $10 million immediately and probably close that virtually right away. And then we would have to come back after December, sometime in January, and do the additional $10 million. The rate is guaranteed, but we would still have $10 million of variable rate debt floating out there between now and January. It would also eliminate us from issuing any more debt in 2012 because 10 million is the cap. So we would be committing ourselves to basically doing the 10 million this year, and we have no other anticipated borrowing this year, so that's not a problem. And another 10 million in January, which would preclude us from doing any borrowing in the next year. So those are more or less the circumstances that we have. The supply and demand conditions now are probably as ideal as they could possibly be for us. You know, cities are not out there borrowing money, whether it's for refunding or new money. They're simply not out there. There are fewer buyers than there were in the past, but there's still more buyers than sellers. So it's somewhat of a seller's market. The clouds that are hanging over us that we're just unsure about is what's going on in Europe. That continues to create waves in our markets just by reverberation almost, or osmosis. And the other thing is this whole business about the federal debt ceiling, and is it going to be extended and raised by the August, 2nd or August 4th deadline. So that kind of fits right in the middle of our 60-day window of what it would take us to do on a competitive basis. Normally, staff would have a fairly strong recommendation of what you should do.
Crap, Steve.
Both these two have real benefits, and that's what we struggled with last night in our discussion, quite
We
frankly.
teased yesterday about the coin toss in one of the movies we had seen recently. It is a decision that really you need to make based on what you think is going to go on in the marketplace. I mean, we have 338 as a rate that is a known quantity, but it has some restrictions on it that we would prefer not to have. But it is locked in, and it's locked in right now. We think that we would probably, if we went out now, even be better than this 315 that PFM has suggested as the rate. We think this would be the high end of the rates if we could go out immediately, but we can't. It's going to take, we have to send a letter of request to the comptroller and get authorization to do this before we can ask you to pass a resolution to go forward with this. And then we have to do the rating and the disclosure documents, et cetera, et cetera.
But
So
you
there
could-
is some time lost in that.
You could do the 20 million,
Yeah.
all of it together.
Yes.
Yeah.
One other.
That's a big point.
Couple other points that Russ has worked on since we discussed last night. Russ did reach out to the Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund. They've agreed to extend the timeline for this to August 10th. So we've got a little more time, although I would urge us to make the decision no later than the July 26th meeting, if we can. And the other element, Russ has worked up draft letters for both options, so we've kind of got that ready to go, whichever way you want to go. You can't pass a resolution until we've gotten the communication back from the comptroller's office. So we need that to happen before we can have you take formal action. So whatever level you're comfortable at, whether that's tonight, whether that's at the recessed Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Friday afternoon, whether that's 2 weeks from now, we can take that direction and do the letter and then get that response back and then have you pass a resolution. That would be how the steps would work from here.
There were a couple other things I wanted to make sure that Russ included, and just to clarify to people that are watching is, first of all, what we're doing is try to stabilize potential water rates long-term by getting rid of the variable debt. It actually is going to cost us more money because money is very, very cheap that we're using now, and you might highlight what that is, how it's tied to a T-bill and what the rate is. And I'd love to see some kind of a feeling from the group tonight as far as how you feel. I don't know if you can give all the feel you want, but just maybe some hint of some of the ideas of where you think we should go with this.
Talk about where variable rates are right now.
Well, I was going to say, I'm sitting here thinking there really is a third option, and you can just let it slide. We're paying the equivalent of 0.4% for this money, for $20 million.
Yeah.
We estimated when we borrowed it that over the life, it would average about 4.5%. If we go this route, it would be 3 3/8% roughly. So you're talking about choosing to pay an extra $500,000 a year in interest right now. But over the life, the 18 years that's left on this bond issue, we do not expect interest rates to be under 1%. I mean, it's ludicrous, and it won't continue. So the juggling act is picking the time when we want to switch over. We're recommending that you act on this now. Again, we took out part of the variable rate last year. We're taking out some of it this year. We'll want to take out some of the variable rate that's in the general fund, in the general obligation bonds, over the next 2 years. And that does two things. It locks in the rates for us, but it also gives us capacity in future years, if rates go much higher, to be able to go in and use some variable rate debt, which means you basically work at the short end of the yield curve. If you're invested in CDs, it means taking out a 4-year CD instead of a 3-month CD. That's really what we're doing. We're converting to that longer term.
This makes sense to look at because it's a 15 to 18-year decision as opposed to a next year or two. So that's why we're bringing it to you now. There is an opportunity, and it's a matter of these two options, we think, at this point, and both have, you make a strong case for both of them, really. And so it's a matter of sort of what kind of risks do you want to take and how we move forward.
I want to ask one more question. I'm going to let, you mentioned taking out some of the more variable rate debt in the future, but you're speaking of 2013, or are you speaking of 2012?
Well, it depends
on the method of how we do this.
We consult regularly with our financial advisor, and we're looking at the rates. Right now, there seems to be no chance or very little probability of increase in the short-term rates on which the variable rate debt is based until the spring of 13. I mean, that's whether you go to any of the banks, the investment companies, all of the advisory agencies where they were predicting we would see rates go back up even last fall. They're now looking well past 2012 and the election before they see any meaningful move in Fed funds rate.
And this is clearly the most attractive of the variable debt that we do have to address at this point. I mean, it's pretty clearly the priority one to address.
I think you just asked my question regarding that there is expectation that there will be no increase in rates between now and
2013.
On
the short term. On the short term, but on the long term, which is what we're looking at, the 3% and up, we're looking at the long end of this, 15, 16, 18 years, that could start creeping up much quicker.
And I think because of where we are in discussion at the federal level, that is very likely to be the case, in my opinion. So I think your recommendation, I will be willing to roll the dice, Mr. Mayor, you want opinions, that we look at moving forward with what you're recommending regarding the municipal bond, the whole 20 million.
The competitive sale.
The competitive sale fund.
Competitive sale. You're saying the whole 20 million.
Yeah, the whole 20 million.
Well, they're both the whole 20 million.
Oh.
One is a competitive sale and one is the bond fund.
This is in one lump sum. This is
10 and 10.
Well, some of
10 and 10.
competitive sale is the entire 20 million as soon as we can do it. The bond fund is 10 million now and 10 million later.
But it is a guaranteed rate. We have the rate locked in. You just execute it in two different actions.
All right, but the competitive means it's whatever it's going to be in 60 days.
Wrong.
In 60 days, we go out to the market, people compete for our business, we take the best
It may be that,
deal.
or it may be higher, or it may be lower.
But the likelihood right now is the dice rolling.
That's what we don't know, but the things that work in our favor are there's a very low supply of municipal debt and an even lower supply of AAA quality debt that we represent.
Yeah.
That's
That's our
why
strong
we,
side.
you know, we're a very attractive credit. So we will get the best deal that's in the market the day we go.
That's good.
But the question will be, what's the
What's the
market
next
going to be
deal?
like 60 days from now? That's where the uncertainty comes into
And it
play.
won't close for 60 days?
It just takes us 60 days to get through the bond
The whole
rating, to
work.
get through the document work that you've all got to do a competitive sale.
So
You-
when can we make this decision?
Let's move on, because I think that's.
If there's enough of a sense tonight, we can even write the letter and send it this, by the end of
Yeah.
this week, if you'd like. And that starts the 15-day clock ticking for the comptroller to get back to us. You know, and we did get a little more breathing room in that we got till August 10th on the municipal bond fund deal. But, you know, there are a number of moving parts either way. The sooner we get that direction, then we can start that going. We've got a window till August 10th to get the guaranteed deal done, the known deal done, or you go through the 60-day process, and we may very well do better. You don't know.
On that line, yeah.
Mike, you said we're currently paying 0.4%.
Yeah, yeah, I know, I know.
0.46, yeah.
I know.
0.4%.
Yeah.
And we're suggesting that we go to either a competitive sale or a Tennessee Municipal Bond Fund, which is going to have $500,000 more in interest immediately than what we're paying, and that there is that appears to be a better option than it is to leave it at the 0.4%, which is certainly not going to go up to 3.15% immediately. So even if you go, you know, it would be interesting to understand. It'd be interesting to me to understand where the break-even point is at, let's just say, at 2% interest. Can you leave the variable rate alone for 5 years and you break even over the 19 years versus what you've got and what you because $500,000 is quite a bit of interest to come back in to guarantee that we're getting 3.15 or 3.38. And I don't particularly like the Tennessee Municipal Bond. I'd rather do the 20 million, tie it all up, and not have next year's borrowing capacity
Good point.
affected
Good point.
by this borrowing here. So,
Right.
so if I'm looking to do one of these, then I'm looking to do the competitive sale. But you know, that's a lot of interest
think you
to have no
upset my
interest
head
right now.
exam.
Well, it's a matter of, it's that 18-year horizon
That's
versus
right.
the next
18
year or
years.
two.
What were
If
the-
you're just looking at the next year or two, we're not even having this conversation.
Right.
This
But
is
if you're
what-
looking at 18 years,
Which we are.
long-term cost to
Yeah.
the city, to the ratepayer,
Millions.
that's where this
That's-
starts
But it's
to become
nothing
a
right
question.
now. It doesn't matter whether it's, well, it doesn't matter whether it's millions in 10 years. It's nothing right now, so it could be millions and you could still break even on, what, if it's $1 billion 10 years and nothing now, you break even in the 10-year period. So, I mean, you know,
This is.
That's the
This is
hardest,
the
world.
that's the hardest part.
That's the third option, is you just sort of keep watching it.
15.
So-
We're talking 15.
You know, realistically, I am a big fan of variable rate debt. I almost hate to say that because it's been challenged on many fronts for a lot of reasons. It would curl your hair if I told you how much the city of Franklin has saved over the years since they started using variable rate debt in 2001 or so.
how much have we saved?
curl your hair.
Actually, we have a spreadsheet. I haven't updated it recently, but it's in excess of $4 million.
Thanks to you.
But
Well,
what happened?
And
is-
predecessors.
That's right.
A lot of
But-
folks. But things have changed.
That's right.
Everything moves on. And what was a terrific vehicle in the early 90s, really through the financial meltdown, the earth has moved. The entire financial structure has changed. These are very short-term notes that basically are turned over every week. And there are usually regular buyers for these type of notes. That's why we get the sweetheart rate, because they're basically one-week notes that keep renewing. So instead of paying 20-year rates, we're paying 1 week or 1 month rates. But we no longer have as many buyers for this. All of the money market people that used to come in and buy this in huge chunks are being much more conservative about how they do that. If we weren't AAA, I would have recommended to you to get out of this entirely 3 years ago. But because we have AAA and because we rating and because we have a very substantial fund balance, that basically, you know, our investments go down when interest rates go down and our debt cost goes down. So they move in tandem, much like the spread on a bank loan. So we've kind of inoculated ourselves from some of the trouble of the last 3 years by having this variable rate debt. But everything comes to an end, and this is a time when we need to look at ending it. But to address your question, we're not recommending that we take out all of it. We still have another $45 million in variable rate debt that's out there. Some of it's swapped, but we still...
But not water and sewer.
Not
water. This is everything in
Not in water and
But this
sewer.
is 40% of our outstanding debt in water and sewer is in this variable piece. And I think that's what, one of the pieces we're trying to address here. You're always going to want to have some variable in your mix. You never put all your eggs in one basket either way. You do have a balance. And so that's what we're trying to look at, is what's the right balance. And especially in the utility business, the ratepayer funded business, the more fixed probably makes a little more sense than maybe the more general component of our debt.
I would phrase it a little different and say that we could absorb some bad news as far as interest rate hikes in the general fund because we have a substantial fund balance. We don't have those fund balances in the utilities. So it's much more of a best practice in that industry to have entirely fixed rate debt in the utilities. The only reason, if you recall, that we have variable rate debt in the utilities today is because in 2008 we had just come out of 2 years of drought. We had a ton of projects we had to do, and the markets had melted down. We couldn't go to the bond market. So we went to our friends at the bond fund, who made us a $20 million loan and has been gracious enough to charge us 0.4% for it for 3 years now. But the time has come when we need to address this in one way or another. And the proof in the pudding is the bond fund themselves are now doing a lot of fixed rate loans as well as variable rate loans, because variable rate loans are just not for everybody. And they're not intended for you to do exclusively.
You explained something a few minutes ago about that we're trying to stabilize this so that we don't have to raise rates. Is that what you said?
What I implied is in the long run, if you know what your interest costs are on the money, then that's how you're calculating your water and sewer rates. But if you have a up and down interest rate, then it's going to be very difficult to be able to calculate accurately what your reimbursement should be.
But don't we already know that it's going up 4% every year until we get that $3 million paid off or whatever it was? Are we talking about?
No, we're not quite talking about that, but
they relate.
It could be more than 4% if we don't do this.
Well, we talked about 4% every year for a while, but I don't know if we're talking about the same thing.
Well, it has an impact because it's all part of the cost structure of that water utility or sewer utility business. And so that's one of the components we're looking at. One of the directions we've taken from the board in the last year or so is to try to make those increases as manageable as they can, kind of smaller, more regular increases as opposed to big shifts and changes, and try to make that more predictable. Mark has worked through especially doing a 5-year outlook in those utilities so that we have a good feeling of where they're going so that we can manage the rates and make it work. This is part of that same outlook, is trying to look at opportunities to set those rates and make that more predictable over the long haul.
And the reason to do it now is, again, we've got a fair offering from the bond fund, and we have a sense that a competitive sale would get us close to that break-even point that you're talking about, that over a long period of time, we're close to the bottom on long-term rates. I mean, we could be fooled and they could be 2.5% next year.
Yep. 500,000 sounds like a tremendous amount, but would that save us go on and take care of that now? Would that save us $500,000 several times down the road?
Oh, yes.
Not guaranteed.
Not guaranteed, you're right, not
No,
guaranteed.
yeah, and nothing is
Calculation
guaranteed.
to make.
If you go back over the last 20 years, the average rate paid on variable rate is in the low 3%, which is right where we are. At the same time, if you were paying fixed rates, it's closer to 5. So that's been the spread over the long history. But we're in an unusual place now. We've been through 3 years of virtually zero interest. We just don't know how long that's going to last.
So
what
everything
did
is
you all
a risk.
decide last night?
Well, could I say something about that?
We didn't.
We did not decide anything, because really, we just got this last night. But I'm thinking again, about it kind of overnight and everything.
Yeah.
Both of these are definitely the two best alternatives. Probably my personal would be maybe to go on and try to sell it all, because one of the questions that I asked, last night was, if we break it down into the 10 million and 10 million, then it really hinders us from issuing
Down
any
the
more
road.
debt in 2012. And,
We don't know what's coming up.
Well, as we stand today, we don't expect to need to go to the market in 12. That's why we put this on the table, but it does present a limiting factor to you, something to think about.
And could
That's a
I
good
go
point.
on and say that one of the questions that I asked about was Hillsborough Road. We have borrowed some of that money already, but, I'm hoping that that's going to get done, or start construction and everything, and we have to pay on that sooner rather than later. And that was the one I asked about last night, although I'm sure there are other things that we would need to look at. But kind of getting it all out of the way, and our consultant was saying that right now, there are lots of bids on quality credit, and we do have quality credit right now.
That's a strong point.
Well, of course, I was at that meeting last night too, and I've slept on it, and it's like, okay, roll the dice. But the more I've thought about it and listened here tonight too, I would agree with Ann. I think all 20 million go out to competitive bid. I think we need to get started immediately.
See a lot of shaking heads, but I see
I don't
one
wanna
more
wait.
hand.
And I
Send the
always said,
competitive
if we do any of the 4, competitive bid would be what I'd want to look at. How much of the principal are we paying down on an annual basis, since we're paying relatively little, to no interest at all? What are we paying on the 19.3 million?
Well, there was a schedule. It was originally set up as level debt service based on a fictitious 4.5%. We assumed that's what the rate would be. So whatever the amount is, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but 3 years into it, there's about 18.5 million left. So we probably paid $400,000 the first year, $500 the next year, $600 the third year, and so on. And it usually ratchets up through the life of the loan. One of the other comments, if we do the competitive sale, we wouldn't be absolutely stuck with this 15-year. The 15-year comparison is, that's as far as the bond fund could get the banks to
It
go.
goes down to 15 years.
If we do competitive sale, we can choose to just refund it on the same principal schedule that we have now, which would be 18.5 years.
Okay.
So that would lighten the increase a little bit.
One item left.
So can I just ask, would it be okay if we send the letter on competitive sale?
Yeah.
Start the process and I'll come
consensus.
forward.
I think we all say
Okay.
yeah.
We're not supposed to vote.
That's not a vote, it's
Not
a
a vote,
board
it's
vote.
just-
It lets us prepare for a vote down the
It's a
line.
raised hand opinion.
All right, number 11, consideration ordinance 2011-24, an ordinance to amend various sections of Title 21, Chapter 1 of the Franklin Municipal Code for the purpose of revising the name of the Affordable Workforce Housing Advisory Commission and membership.
Thank you, Mayor
Y'all
Alderman.
are planning too
It's
much.
a pretty, the commission has been meeting for 6 months now and making some progress and formulating some strategies. They simply are doing a little house cleaning on the ordinance, changing the name, shortening it to Housing Commission. A couple of the not-for-profits that had originally been identified and expressed the willingness to serve decided that, you know, they have other members participating, so there's some cross members there, and that's pretty much it.
Everybody good? We'll convene for executive session at 6:45. Did you have a question?
I'll just go back, do you make a motion off of that?
Because we're not
No,
voting.
it'll be, it's on the.
Oh, for executive session.
To enter into executive session.
Yes, it's 6:45. There's a motion to enter an executive session at 6:45. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? See none?